Hey guys, my name is Lauren Boone for Aniwaya Education Services. It's a day in Aniwaya, so we are talking about best assessment practices. If you haven't already, please do like and subscribe to our channel. We always love providing you guys with lots of free content, but give us a little bit of love back, and that would be amazing. So guys, today we are talking about validity. Okay, now validity is probably one of the ones where I feel that despite the fact that I've done 27,000 podcasts on this, there is still large swaths of the vet sector and even for a lot of curriculum developers that really don't understand what this means. So obviously validity is the only one that sits both in the principles of assessment and the rules of evidence. So under the new 2025 standards, the definition of validity under the principles of assessment is assessment of skills and knowledge is integrated with practical application and would enable a vet student to demonstrate these skills and knowledge in similar situations. Okay, so that's really important. So we're thinking about context here. And then under the principles of assessment, it says that assessment evidence assures the assessor that the vet student has the skills and knowledge described in the training product. Okay, so I want to alert you guys to a couple of words here. So the evidence assures the assessor, okay, because ultimately the assessor under the principles of under the rules of evidence, it is the assessor who is collecting that. It is the assessor who has their TAE, their vet industry competency and currency. Okay, so it's the assessor that has to be assured of that. All right, that the student has both the skills and the knowledge as described in the training product. Okay. So when we go into the ASQA guidance, and for those of you that haven't checked out the new practice guide on assessment, I will link it below. ASQA has released a range of the practice guides. It's really important that you guys do read those because it gives you a context of how the regulator is interpreting these things. You are able to show how you ensure validity of assessment. For example, assessment is based on evidence that demonstrates a student could perform the skills and knowledge in other similar situations. Again, guys, let's think about context. Let's think about industry realism. Assessment of knowledge and skills is integrated with practical application. Yes, your students have to do something. Skills are assessed by observing the student carrying out the relevant task in the appropriate environment. Okay. So again, we're seeing this link to like, is it being done in an industry realistic environment? This is going to be a theme, guys. We're following this theme. Judgment of competence is based on a range of relevant evidence, ensuring that there is a direct relationship between the assessment task or activity that the student undertakes, including the assessment of practical application of skills, and the evidence presented to the student and the assessment requirements. Okay. So this is something that like, it honestly doesn't matter how many validations I do. This is like one of the first things I go for. So my process in validating an assessment is I go through and I look at criteria and I pick out criteria that I know means that the student has to actually do something. Okay. So whether it is welding or painting or implementing a process or reviewing a process or like whatever it is. Okay. There are like thousands of skills, whether it's, drying hair or coloring hair or, planting a seed, right? I'm going to go to that skill and I'm going to go, right, the student has to do something there, right? Vet is about skills. It's not about knowledge. It's about skills. This is like the big difference in vet. I look at that skill and then I go to the mapping guide and I expect in the mapping guide to be able to see very, very clearly what evidence is going to be collected based on that. Because the mapping guide is going to tell me what the assessment is. I'm going to be able to go to the assessment, read the instructions on the assessment. Okay. You as a student need to do this. Okay. And then I go down into my observation checklist and I'm going to see something along the lines of, you saw the student do this, and then this is what it looked like, right? That's going to get into reliability. That's going to be another episode. We're going to go into that, but that's what I expect to see, right? And then there might be some additional supporting evidence of that, which is something along the lines of, a job card or a product that they developed or a photo or whatever. Okay. And again, we're going to get into that when we get into sufficiency. But what I really want to focus on at the moment is that if the criteria is to do something, the assessment cannot be explain to me how you would do this, because that's not them doing the skill. That's them explaining how they would do the skill. And I say this, guys, because I feel like a broken record. I've sat through so many ASQA presentations where they've explained this very clearly. I have explained this over and over again in audit after audit after audit, right? In validation after validation after validation. If the skill is ride a bicycle, the appropriate assessment for that skill is not explain to me how you would ride a bicycle. It's to ride the fucking bicycle, guys. That's the assessment. Not telling me how you would do it, but actually doing it. I honestly cannot say this any clearer, but yet year after year after year, we validate these assessments, and the assessment is explain to me how you would do this or how you would respond to this situation, as opposed to doing the thing. You have to do the thing, guys. And validity says you do the thing in an environment that would be like you would be doing it in the workplace. Because then when I tick that you have that skill as an assessor to say that you can do the thing, right? And I issue the certificate to say that you do the thing. And then the student goes out into industry and they've never done the thing. It pisses people off, right? It does. And it frustrates auditors no end. And you know what? I get it. It frustrates me too. All right. If I get a diploma in bicycle riding, I expect you to know how to ride a bicycle, right? And this is like one of the biggest things in industry. And I'm speaking to you, TAE providers, at the moment. If your job is to teach people how to train and assess, you need to get your students to train and assess. And you, as TAE qualified trainers and assessors, if you are giving your students qualifications in building, construction, commercial cookery, how to be a hairdresser, how to be a engineer, how to be an electrician, okay, then make sure that they can do the fucking skill. It's not that hard, right? It's really not that hard. It's not hard designing great assessments. I think it's hilarious. My 2IC, Michelle, and I were having this discussion last night, and she's like, I genuinely thought we would get to a point where we had just built everything and everybody would know how to build good assessments, especially with the tools available to us nowadays. And she's like, but it's never going to get to that point. And no, it's never going to get to that point, because it doesn't matter how many of these videos I do, we still don't seem to be getting the point. Validity is about one thing. If you have to do the thing, you do the thing. Okay. Now, some of the criteria that we deal with in our training packages is a little bit more obtuse, and it's very difficult to collect. So criteria such as build a relationship with another person, incredibly difficult to collect good evidence of that, because it's not an objective thing. Okay. And that is actually something that needs to be better written into our training packages. Saying that you can develop an effective relationship with somebody, really, really vague criteria, really hard to deal with. What would be better is if we saw more information from our training packages where it was more explicit sort of skills, so that they can communicate ideas in a range of different ways, right? That's part of it. That they can use active listening skills such as good eye contact, repeating questions, again, like it's a more defined, it's a more observable criteria. Develop effective relationships, develop and foster trust. is really is far more ambiguous. But a lot of the skills that we deal with in vet, where I consistently see these kind of what ifs, are in really practical skills, really, really practical skills. So validity, guys, is about making sure that you're doing the thing in a relevant environment. And the other part of that we just constantly see is that there is not enough information provided to students for it to actually be an appropriate simulated environment. So BSB training package is really bad for this. Like when we see people delivering business qualifications, and we're not giving students especially if we're dealing with it in an institution or an online based pathway, you have to provide students with the simulation, which means that you're going to have to create a lot of supporting documentation, right? We've been working with an amazing provider the last couple of, probably the last 2 years, developing a very high level qualification. But for each unit, we've got something like in excess of, 50 to 100 supporting documents, right? Again, this is very high level. This is like AQF8 stuff. It's in the, sort of business and finance sector. So there is a lot that is required in order to produce a sufficient simulated environment, right? But even when I'm dealing with, a simple AQF2, AQF3 business unit, if I'm asking students to do an assessment where they have to create a business spreadsheet, I've got to give them the data that is sufficient, breadth and depth and complexity from a business environment, that the student then has to put that into that correct spreadsheet. And we do see a lot of this whereby we're not providing realistic simulated environments. We're not providing enough supporting documentation to the students for the student to actually be able to do the task to the complexity that would be required in the workplace. So if we're asking somebody to develop a complex spreadsheet and we're giving them 7 pieces of data, that's not a complex spreadsheet. I'm sorry, it's not. And so this is where it's really important that you're working with people from industry and you're understanding, whoever is building your assessment tools has an understanding of that industry or is working with people to validate that assessment tool from that industry to make sure that they're doing it. So I know that this has been a bit of a ranty one. This is always this series is going to be ranty, guys. I've done this series. I swear to God, I've been doing this series for 6 or 7 years now. I will legit link to podcasts that I've done back during, I was in lockdown in COVID and I was doing the exact same freaking podcast that I'm doing now, because these things actually have not changed that much and people continue to make the same mistakes. And if you are buying assessment tools or you are building assessment tools and you think it's appropriate to ask how would I do this question and use that as your evidence that they can then do the thing, right? I'm sorry, the regulator is not going to find it acceptable. You should not be using that assessment tool. It's a shit assessment tool. Your assessors who are using that assessment tool and think that that's okay, it's not okay, guys. It's just not. I literally have spent my last 20 years building assessment tools and teaching good assessment practices. And this is a very basic thing that we've been talking about. I've sat in sessions where ASQA was talking about this in 2017 at the VELD conference, right? This has not changed. If the skill is ride a bicycle, they have to ride a bicycle. If the skill is paint a door, they have to paint a door. If the skill is soldering silver, they have to solder silver. Right? You can't say, how would you solder silver? And then the explanation of how they do that is sufficient to know that they would know how to do that thing. And this does apply as well to interactions, right? I see this all the time with the customer units and things like that, in the complaints units, dealing with aggression, all of this sort of stuff. If the task is deal with an aggressive client, you have to deal with an aggressive client. Now, you can do that in a safe way. You can prep the student that this is what's going to happen. You can make sure that there is a safe word. But you have to show the student, like you have to put the student in that situation where they then have to, where it's kicking in, where the fight or flight instinct is kicking in, right? If you're dealing with a complaint, they have to actually deal with a complaint. You can't say, oh, well, if somebody came to you and they were very angry and they got in your face, how would you deal with that? It's not the same thing, guys. It's just not the same thing. How people think they will react in a situation, how people think they will approach negotiation, how people think they will, deal with an emergency is not how they actually deal with them. When you actually front up on a person, right? And you can get that fight or flight instinct, and there's lots of ways that you can do it now, right? You can put them in VR situations. You can put them in AI situations. You can have assessors role play with them and have safe words and things like that. You can trigger the fight or flight instinct, right? Without putting the student into danger. But by triggering that fight or flight instinct, the students actually see how they behave in those situations. The vast majority of people are actually not capable of dealing with an emergency. I know because I've seen it. I've seen it time after time after time after time after time. Right? If you are going to be teaching them how to deal with an emergency, you have to teach them how to deal with the freaking emergency. And the first thing they've got to do is they've got to be able to keep their shit together, right? That is the first part of it. It just is. So you really need to be understanding what your criteria is asking. And when it comes to practical criteria, you have to be doing stuff with them, guys. You have to be evidencing that. And the other thing that you're then going to have to do is you're going to have a benchmark for what that looks like. And that's going to take us into our next episode on reliability. So guys, if you liked me ranting at you for the last, I don't know, however many minutes, keep following on with this series. Do give us a like. If you disagree, by all means, feel free to do so. And while I will duke it out with you respectfully. But that's it for us today, guys. This has been all about validity in 2025. I'm sure I will see you again to do this in 2026. My name is Lauren Boot for Aniwaya Education Services.